Our New Testament lesson is Luke 15, verses 11 to 32. This is a familiar story. I encourage you to try to see it with new eyes, as if hearing it for the first time. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property on dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he had got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the word of the Lord.
There are a lot of movies that I enjoy watching over and over and over. My wife, for example, just wonders and marvels at just how many times does a man have to watch Shawshank Redemption, or Casablanca, or Star Wars, or any one of the Star Trek movies, or at least the odd number ones, or is it even whatever it is. I love to see these stories over and over. They're so familiar. It's hard to watch them fresh. Every time The Great Escape comes on, I always am channel surfing, and I always seem to catch it just at that moment, when Steve McQueen is an American soldier who has escaped from a POW camp. And he's along the Swiss border. And he's on a motorcycle. And it's hilly country. And he's speeding up. And he's able to jump over one set of fence. You know that scene? Yes. And then he's between the 2 fences. And he's being chased by a Nazi on a motorcycle. You know who's playing the Nazi, by the way? Steve McQueen. They couldn't find someone else to ride a motorcycle as good as Steve McQueen, so he's playing both parts. The Nazi has goggles on and a helmet, so you really can't tell, but it's Steve McQueen chasing himself. And every time I see that scene, I find myself, come on, Steve, this time you can make it. And he never makes it. He always gets caught up in the wires, and so it is. The same story all the time, never changes. Once in a while, I do see a movie that I think, okay, I've seen it enough times. The Wizard of Oz. I have been down that yellow brick road one too many times. And I think about the New Testament lesson today. It's at risk of being an experience like the Wizard of Oz. The prodigal son becomes like one of those movies who has been on the channel every week, weeks on end. We all know the story. Like watching the Star Wars movies over and over. At some point, there's no surprise in hearing Darth Vader tell the young hero, Luke Skywalker, "I am your father." At some point, the words have become not just expected, but boring. The shock value has worn off. Just like the opening line. There was a man who had 2 sons. We know where this story is going. The story has all the bland predictability of old black and white movies that are shown every Christmas Eve. There's a story, and there's a horrible moment in which the son says to a loving father, "Give me my share of the inheritance." In other words, "Dad, I've been waiting for you to die for a long time, and you're not getting with it. I want my money now." And it leaves us unruffled because we know the story so well. Fear not. The boy's coming home. He always does. The road always leads back from a far country, and it's paved and well lit. It's traveled so many times. What would happen if one day we read the story and the prodigal son didn't come back, but had a different story? I don't know whether you noticed or not, but many studios film more than one ending of a movie. They do this for a couple of reasons. First of all, it can sell DVDs because everybody wants to see the alternative ending. You know that? Yeah. Another reason is because actors can't keep their mouth shut. And so they'll be interviewed and they'll let the cat out of the bag. And so even the actors and the film cast, film crew, they don't know the ending because they have filmed 3 or 4 different endings. And you don't know until it hits the theater which one is the ending. What would it be like if the prodigal son had ended differently? An alternative ending. Actually, I saw that lived out once. Before coming to Grace Covenant, I was the pastor of a church that did a lot of work with the homeless. Every day they would come to the church where they could find a breakfast and a bag lunch, and there were showers, and once a week, haircuts, and once every other week, doctors and nurses, and sometimes a dentist. We offered job training and drug and alcohol recovery, and sometimes I would do a funeral for these folks. And the funerals were different. They weren't held in the sanctuary. They were held in the fellowship hall, and we would serve lunch for the funeral events. And I never dressed like this at a funeral for them. They preferred me in blue jeans and just a golf shirt. Tin Man was one such fellow whose funeral I did. Most of the guys had these great street names like Kickstand and Cowboy and Tin Man. And Tin Man worked the streets by picking up aluminum cans and bottles, and he would sell them for a few pennies at the recycling center. In the 4 or 5 years that I knew Tin Man, I don't think he ever held another job. A lot of the other homeless folks would sometimes get a job on a fishing boat, or they would do yard work, or all sorts of other things. But collecting trash and recycling, that's about all that Tin Man could handle. And from time to time, he would show up for breakfast drunk, and according to the rules of our program, he would be banned from the program for a few days. He'd get sober, and then a few weeks later, he'd get drunk. It was like shampoo. You repeat. In December, Tin Man would come to the church for our Christmas party with the homeless, And we always gave everybody a gift. And one year, we gave everybody a brand new pair of shoes. Walmart had sponsored a program for us, and everybody got a brand new pair of shoes, and he kept his for a day or two. And then he sold them and bought some booze and went out and got drunk. Tin Man was a man who just wasted his life away. Actually, that's the definition of prodigal, wasteful. We think of it as being defined as someone who comes back, but no, it's someone who wastes life. Every opportunity that came along that might have offered some hope or an opportunity for something better, Tin Man just wasted. And one day he got drunk on the beach, and the tide came in, and he was too drunk to realize he was drowning. And it was an experience that happened 2 or 3 times a year on the beach. And the day I did his funeral, the church was full of humble-looking folks, mostly homeless men and women, a few fishermen or hotel workers or restaurant workers who were working with very low wages and few hours, struggling to get by. But there were 2 people who seemed out of character with that group, and they were sitting on the back row, a man and a woman, very stylishly dressed. Tin Man's family, his mom and dad. Now, at most funerals, the kinds that we do here, the pastor will officiate the service, and 1 or 2 friends or relatives will get up and share a few personal stories. But at these funerals for the homeless, one of the customs was every single person got up to say something. And the stories were great. There was lots of laughter. People would talk about the deceased, and they would find positive things about the person's character, and they would share funny stories. Tin Man's funeral was no different, and people stood up and they remembered his jokes and they remembered him. And then his mother got up to speak. She called Tin Man by a different name, one that we'd never heard before. Keith. Keith was a straight A student. He was the quarterback for his high school football team. He attended Purdue University. We had no clue. Who would have thought? Mom shared the first time that her son came home drunk. She talked about how she learned that she would have to hide her money and her credit cards because Keith would steal from her for money to be used for drugs and alcohol. She talked about the painful experience of the first time she got a telephone call from the police and she had to go to the local jail and bail him out, and how she had to do that a second time and a third time and again, and she lost count. And how extremely difficult it was one day to get a call from the police and to hang up the phone and just stay home so that Keith would have to wake up in the jail sober enough to realize what he had done. She became the father of this parable, who had to let her son go because there was nothing the father, or in this case the mother, could do that would change the lost son. And she was telling the story almost in a whisper when she got to the part about seeing Keith leave for the last time. And she would never see her son again, and that was 16 years earlier. And she would wait for him to return home. He never did. And from time to time, she'd get a postcard or a telephone call from Keith letting his parents know that where he was living and what he was doing. And in recent years, he would talk about this church where he made friends and we would get breakfast, and he was working to recycle things for extra money. And Mom would stay at home looking out the window, waiting, hoping for Keith to come back, and he never did. And then one day, it was too late. Keith was dead. Keith Engel, a.k.a. Tin Man, died September 28, 2012, at the age of 44. The alternative ending of the prodigal son is not a happy ending. We know how it ends in the Bible, but this is how it often ends in real life. The lost all too often stay lost, while we, the righteous children, here we are, safe in the Father's house, singing our familiar hymns, greeting our friends at church, enjoying the cookies in the fellowship hall after the service. And outside the church are the brothers and sisters who have wasted the love of God and traded it for something less. And they are the lost, and they are the hurting. And what do? We keep gathering here, safe in our Father's house, singing our familiar hymns, greeting our friends at church, and enjoying those cookies in fellowship hall before we have lunch. I grew up at a time when everybody went to church. It was expected. On Sunday morning, it wasn't just Chick-fil-A that was closed. The library, the grocery stores, the gas stations, every place was closed. If you needed a prescription filled, you had to call the pharmacist at home and beg the pharmacist to go open up the store and let you have your medicine. Everyone was in church. And now you look around the neighborhoods and people are staying home and they're not looking for God. Our brothers and sisters have asked for their inheritance early, and they're staying home. They've left for a far country. This parable may have become so familiar that we're bored by it, but stop and think about the context in which it is told. Luke 15 actually tells 3 parables, not one, but 3. There's the parable of the lost sheep. The shepherd leaves the 99 sheep in order to look for the lost one. Now, I'm not a shepherd, but that always struck me as stupid. You got 99 good sheep. You take care of them. But no, in the parable, you leave the 99 and you go looking for the lost one. And in that parable, he finds it. He celebrates. And then there's the story of the lost coin. The woman turns the house upside down, high and low, looking for this lost coin. Now listen, I've lost coins in my house. I've lost my wallet. I've lost my keys. They're going to show up eventually. I look around, and eventually I find it. But she finds the coin. She celebrates. She throws a party, which probably costs more than the coin she found. You know how we react when the lost are found? You know how we react when a sinner comes back to God? It's hard to say because it doesn't happen enough. In fact, when was the last time we baptized an adult in this church who was not raised and nurtured by the church or born into a church family? Regina joined my church many, many years ago. She was homeless and jobless, and when she worked, it was at the local strip club. She had been arrested for prostitution, and one day she began coming to church for the food program that we held in that church, the same one that Keith, Tin Man, had gone to. And she began working. Not just showing up for food, but working to help set up the tables and things like that. And then she wanted to help with other things in the church. And one day she was baptized and joined the church. Skip forward to today, many years later, she's now employed by a restaurant as an assistant manager. She's been doing that for several years. She is an ordained elder in a Presbyterian church. But you know how people responded the day she joined the church and was baptized? People whispered. They murmured. Well, she's immoral. We can't have somebody like that with our children. We sure can't have a woman like that around our menfolk. Hardly anybody rejoiced. Like the older son who looks at the returning son with contempt, we think, who is she? She doesn't talk like a person who comes to church. She doesn't eat the kind of foods we eat. She acts so different. She's got a different background. We're the righteous, you know. Well, it's time for us to welcome those who are out there. In fact, it's not just time for us to welcome them in here, which I think we do a pretty good job of. We got to go out and find them. We got to leave the 99 here and search for the one lost one. It's time for us to find the ones who don't look like us, talk like us, smell like us, dress like us. It's time for us to be reckless with our love for the lost. I think we've been too stingy with our invitation to others to come back to God, to get back into the family. We should invite to the point of reckless abundance. And when people come into this church and want to join our fellowship and they look like they don't belong, we should say to them, thank God you've come back. You belong here. We've been waiting for you. It's time to celebrate. It's time to be joyful because that doesn't happen nearly enough. And now unto God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit be ascribed all might, power, dominion, and glory today and forever. Amen.